我的祖先到台湾来，第一代应该是在康熙年间。几百年来，我们都住在台南的马兵营，这个是郑成功当年呢骑兵训练的地方，可以说是7代7房啊，所有的族人那个时候，都聚集在一起。
In 1894, Li Yantown, who lived in the cavalry barrack in Tainan, was 16 years old. At 13, his father bought a Taiwan Prefecture Chronicle for him and said, "You were born in Taiwan. You should understand things concerning Taiwan." Since then, Li Yantown tried hard to study history. In April 1894, the provincial capital of Taiwan was officially moved from Taichung to Taipei. After Taiwan was established as a province, a huge cultural project to compile a new Taiwan General Annals was pushed forward. So the administration for compilation of Taiwan General Annals was established with a huge investment. A large number of talents were recruited. Plenty of Fujian and Jinshu scholars were involved in this cultural feast. Unexpectedly, in July 1894, the First Sino-Japanese War broke out because of the Korean issue. The war spread from Korea to China's Yellow Sea, Liaodong and Shandong. The Japanese army wiped out the Qing dynasty's elite Beiyang fleet and then sent troops to march to the capital. The Qing dynasty was at stake. The war lasted for nearly 9 months, ending with China's total defeat and humiliation of ceding territory and paying indemnities. Yet the war did not end. The battlefield was changed to Taiwan. In 1895, Taiwan entered into a critical stage of survival. Taiwan Governor Tang Jing-song issued in April 1894 an anti-Japanese recruitment notice. Tang Jing-song from Guanyang, Guangxi, was transferred to Taiwan as the highest military commander. In October 1894, after the First Sino-Japanese War broke out, he took over as Taiwan governor. At the time of the crisis, Tang Jing-song actively prepared for Taiwan's defense with all his efforts. The Taiwan General Annals, which had already taken 3 years and cost 100,000 taels of silver, was stopped by the impending war. The General Annals administration interviewer Qiu Fengjia was a Hakka. He was born in Miaoli County, Taiwan. At 26, he earned the title of Jinshi and was selected as the director of the Department of Work, but he was uninterested. He came back to Taiwan to start a teaching career. As one of the leaders in the Taiwan intellectual circle during the crisis, Qiu Fengjia, at 30, was pushed to the front line of recruiting troops to defend Taiwan. Shunpando in Shimonoseki of Japan was a restaurant famous for serving fugu dishes. Starting from March 20th, 1895, China and Japan held 6 rounds of truce negotiations here. Li Hongjiang and the country he represented had become like a puffer fish.
在谈判的过程中，日本方面就提出了非常苛刻的这个停战的条件。李鸿章在这个过程中也反反复复的几次的，甚至以台民反对啊，以台民吸食鸦片呐，等等争取不割让，均遭到伊藤博文的反驳。割让台湾是他势在必得的。
Li Hongjiang, who was shot in the cheek by a Japanese assassin in Shimonoseki, pleaded with Ito Hirobumi at the negotiation table. What he didn't know was that, as early as in the 3rd round negotiation, on the afternoon of March 24th, over 5,000 troops of the Japanese Hijishima Blended Brigade launched a sudden attack and captured Penghu. Threatening to assault Taiwan, Japan intended to create a fait accompli, forcing the Qing court to accept Japan's most harsh conditions. On April 17, 1895, Li Hongjiang was forced to sign with Ito Hirobumi the Shimonoseki Treaty that humiliated China and forfeited its sovereignty. China compensated Japan with 220 million taels of silver. The land of Dragon Rising, the Liaodong Peninsula, was ceded to Japan. Later, due to the interference of Russia, France, and Germany, Japan had to give it up, and the Qing government paid another 30 million taels of silver for redemption. Taiwan and the Penghu Islands were ceded to Japan. That April in Beijing, thousands of Jiren who came from various provinces to participate in the imperial examination were seen everywhere. When waiting for the release of the admission list, they heard such an astonishing treaty, a treaty of territory cession, reparation, and humiliation. Everyone was so shocked. At that time, several Jiren such as Wang Chunyuan, Luo Xiuhui, Huang Zongding, and officials of Taiwan origin in Beijing, Ye Tieyuan and Li Jingqi, hit heads, bowed their heads, cried and shed tears. They took the lead to petition to the inspection department.
以其身为降奴，不如死为义人，表达了这么一种心声，画出了一种各腹之痛。
Guangdong Jiren Kang Youwei united with other Jiren scholars to present a collective memorial to the Qing court.
康有为在里面讲到，台湾几人垂涕而请命，莫不哀之。那后来他也感到士气可用，然后就去发动各省几联联名上书。
Kang Youwei spent 1 day and 2 nights writing the 10,000-word petition letter, requesting the Qing court to reject the peace talk, initiate a reform movement, and move the capital. On this 10,000-word petition letter, there were 603 Jirens from 18 provinces signing their names. Officials from all levels of the Qing government followed suit. The tide of sending anti-cession petitions was surging in Beijing. From mid-April to early May, a total of 140 memorials with thousands of signatures were presented to throne. The bad news of ceding Taiwan to Japan reached the island. On hearing such sudden news, people of Taiwan were shocked, as if they heard a midnight thunder. Their faces turned pale. Running to inform each other, they cried on the streets day and night. Their cries could be heard in the wild. The area around today's Taipei's Sun Yat-sen Hall was once home to Taiwan governor's office. Taiwan's sorrowful and angry public sentiments via the electric wires of Governor Tang Jingsong were sent to Beijing over and over. Taiwan people are angry and resentful. They will not yield to the Japanese. Taiwan residents are extremely angry. Taiwan people will not yield. Residents of Taipei struck guns and protested on the streets. Gentry members and residents flocked to the governor's office, presenting a collective petition written with blood. Chu Fengjia was the most important leader in the anti-cession movement. He stabbed himself 3 times and used his own blood to write his petitions. We people cannot accept giving Taiwan to the Japanese pirates. Taiwan is the homeland of your subjects. It's only right that we live and die with it. Meanwhile, Tang Jingsong was also seeking ways to fight with the Japanese. He repeatedly submitted memorials to the throne. It's better to break the treaty and fight. In this way, we might have another chance. Only by fighting will we have a chance to survive. Cession and reparation is a dead end. Tears, blood, and crying are no longer helpful. Taiwan officials and gentry led by Chu Fengjia launched a strategy to help themselves. This strategy was proposed by Tang Jingsong's aide, former counselor of the Qing Dynasty legation to Germany and Italy, Chen Jitong.
唐景崧啊，他是接受了陈继同的一个策略，就是成立台湾民主国。
This desperate survival plan was citing international public law to decide whether the territory occupation is allowed and striving for international intervention to force Japan to abandon its cession clause.
台湾民主国当时并不是说要自外于中国，而是说以台湾民主国的名义的话，就看能不能就是说可以免除于被日本人统治。
This was the national flag of the democratic state of Taiwan, with a yellow tiger on blue base color.
这个虎尾向上，尾高手低，就表示那个它是向清朝臣服的。 同时，它的国号也称为永清，就是永远就是忠实于清朝的这个意思。
On May 25th, a seal presentation parade was held in Taipei. The democratic state of Taiwan was established in the bitter windy and rainy weather with Chu Fengjia, Liu Yongfu, and others holding important official titles, and Tang Jingsong was acclaimed as president. 5 days ago, the Qing court had dismissed his governorship and decreed civil and military officials to return to the mainland. He was asked to stay by the Taiwan people to take the post he didn't want. At the inauguration ceremony, Tang Jingsong cried out loud. On June 2nd, Li Jingfang at sea off Sandiaojiao, Keelung, completed the Taiwan handover procedure with Kabayama Skinori, the representative of Japan. Li Jingfang was the son of Li Hongjiang, and he was extremely reluctant to play this role. He did not dare to go ashore and feared being killed by the angry Taiwan public. In fact, this handover was just a formality. 4 days before the signing of this paper, the Japanese army had landed in Taiwan already. Audi, a beautiful bay in northern Taiwan. On the afternoon of May 29, 1895, the Japanese Imperial Guard Corps bypassed Tang Jingsong's key defenses of Keelung and Tamshui, landing on the beach at Audi. Thus, Taiwan's resistance war against Japan kicked off. The Japanese Imperial Guard Corps was the Japanese Emperor's Guardian Army, an elite division bearing the Emperor's honor. The division commander was the second uncle of Emperor Meiji. Kitashirakawa Yoshihisa landed at Audi. This was the picture of Kitashirakawa, who sat on the royal sofa and stepped on the Taiwan land with riding boots. After landing, the 1st Brigade immediately dispatched troops and advanced over Sandiaolin towards Keelung. The circuitous marching route disrupted the defense plan designed by Tang Jingsong, who was boasting his own military talents. The Yueyong that was rushed to the battlefield quickly collapsed. On the early morning of May 31st, Yu Mingzhen, Interior Minister of the Democratic State of Taiwan, was ordered by Tang Jingsong to the front line to oversee the war. Facing such a chaotic situation, Yu Mingzhen, a literatus from Jiangsu and Zhejiang, showed no mercy and killed several deserters. In the pouring rain, Yu Mingzhen wept and cried to the Qing soldiers. Today's fight is for the life and death of Taiwan. If you back off, I must shoot you. If I retreat back to the base camp, now fighting to death with you, I would like to be beheaded to redeem my guilt. On June 2nd, the Japanese army in Rifan encountered the first fierce resistance. During the fierce fighting, Zhang Jiaolin was wounded. Deputy Commander Chen Desheng was killed, and Yu Mingzhen, who was in the line of command, was also wounded and was carried out of the battlefield. Keelung, the port of Taipei, on June 3rd, 8 Japanese squadrons of over 4,000 soldiers launched an onslaught against Keelung. The offensive and defensive battle of Keelung started in a downpour. After 5 hours of fierce fighting, the streets of Keelung were occupied by the Japanese. The Japanese army showed off their trophies and piled up thousands of boxes of ammunition in a temple. On June 5th, the ammunition suddenly exploded, killing 21 Japanese soldiers and injuring over 20 others. 2 Qing soldiers were captured. Their units were defeated, but they did not leave. With the courage to die, they ignited this amazing explosion. One of them did not leave a name. For the other one, the Japanese military literature called him Hun Sanjin. Although there was no shortage of brave soldiers, the northern defense was totally collapsed. On June 3rd, the same day that Keelung fell, the Shiqiu Ridge High Point was also captured by the Japanese. There was no place to defend to the north of the provincial capital. Taipei was in danger. Plenty of defeated soldiers poured into the city, all in a mess. Tang Jingsong could not control the situation. In the night of June 4th, the gate of government office compound was set on fire by the defeated soldiers. Tang Jingsong escaped from his office, heading to Tamshui in casual wear. 2 days later, he took the other back to the mainland, leaving the still embattled island behind. On June 6th, Gu Xianrong went to Keelung to guide the Japanese army into Taipei. Afterwards, he received special favor from the new Japanese Governor-General of Taiwan and became rich overnight. On June 7, the advanced units of the Imperial Guard Corps occupied Taipei. On June 11th, Kitashirakawa Yoshihisa led all units to enter the Taipei walled city from the north gate. This ill-fated city just passed its 10th year after its completion. Then it fell into the hands of the Japanese army. The Taiwan Provincial Administrative Office, Taiwan's largest government building in the Qing Dynasty, became the Taiwan Governor-General's Office of the Japanese Empire. On June 17th, Kabayama Skenori held the initiation of Taiwan administration ceremony here. Since then, Japan had regarded this day as the beginning of its rule over Taiwan, calling it Initiation of Administration Memorial Day. 2 days after the initiation of administration, on June 19th, Major General Yamane Shinsei led a blended detachment to the south, trying to take down Hsinchu at Wan below to open the southward passage. But the Japanese could not advance as fast as that in Taipei. In the Taochu Miao area, there lived Fujian and Guangdong migrant villages, mostly Hakkas. After the fall of Taipei, the cultivators of this land stood up to fight for their homelands. They used the primitive weapons of bamboo poles and clippers to fight against the Japanese regular army. During their heroic resistance, Beipu, Hsinchu, when Jiang Xiaozu, the fourth-generation descendant of the Jin Guangfu reclamation family, heard Taipei's fall, he dispersed his wealth and recruited regiment members, forming a volunteer army of over 500 people under the banner of Gan to fight with the Japanese. At 19, Jiang Xiaozu was the youngest leader of the Taiwan Volunteer Anti-Japanese Regiment. Martial art training school operator Xu Xiang and teacher Wu Tangxing also organized their volunteer anti-Japanese regiments. Both of them and Jiang Xiaozu were descendants of Hakka migrants, and they were also Shucai scholars. Later generations called them three Hakka anti-Japanese Shucais. The volunteer forces in Shucai and Miaoli were called Xinmiao Army and were all under the leadership of Wu Tangxing. 36-year-old Wu Tangxing was known in neighboring areas for his righteous acts. After the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, Wu Tangxing petitioned to fight the Japanese and was recommended by Chu Fengjia to Tang Jinsong. From Tang Jinsong, he received this official seal of Commander of Taiwan Volunteer Forces. On June 11th, the same day Kitashirakawa Yoshihisa entered Taipei City, inside Hsinchu walled city, Wu Tangxing led volunteer forces, offering sacrifices to military banners. He expressed his determination to die.
It is time for us to offer our lives.
Afterward, the various units of the Xinmiao Army, under the command of Wu Tangxing, joined forces with the Hunan General Yang Zaiyun's Hsinchu Army to ambush separately the southward Japanese army with guerrilla tactics. The Japanese army was in a state of bitter struggle, according to the Japanese journalist and painter who followed the military actions. One bamboo in Taiwan can grow dozens of stems. The bamboo forest is very dense. The enemies were entrenched in the bamboo forest, firing randomly and fiercely with rifles, using houses in the bamboo bushes as a stronghold. They resisted tenaciously. The opponents were very tenacious and were not afraid to die. They hid in the village houses. When a house was destroyed by cannon fire, they calmly moved to another house and launched an attack whenever an opportunity came. After a fierce battle by the Hsinchu-Juchong-Lin River, over 10 corpses of Wufeng Lin Chaodong's Dong Army soldiers were left there. The Japanese army found among them, there was an armed feminine dead body. After careful inspection, it was a female soldier disguised as a man, with many bullets tied around her waist. From this, it could be judged that there might be other females joining the fight. Hsinchu in northern Taiwan, the second largest city after Taipei, fell into the hands of the Japanese army of June 22nd. Around the city, the two sides fought multiple battles for over 50 days. On July 10th, the anti-Japanese coalition forces counterattacked for the second time, but they were ambushed by the Japanese troops. The situation was critical. At this time, Jiang Xiaozu led the way and fought all the way from the Shibajian mountain to the east gate to cover the transfer of the main force. But he was outnumbered, trapped in a dangerous situation.
江少主吞服鸦片膏，自尽而亡。在他身亡之前，题下了绝命诗：“男儿因为国家计，岂敢偷生降敌夷。” 江少主，他当时是只有19岁，跟他的妻子陈满妹才新婚不久。在江少主壮烈成人大约1个月后，他的遗腹子才出生。
The Dakakan Creek that flowed into the Tamsui River was the golden waterway of the Han people to transport tea and camphor to Taipei. Now, in these areas, those southern Fujian people had raised the anti-Japanese banners. The main leaders were descendants of the migrants from Anxi, Fujian. The camphor maker Su Li, his nephew Su Jun, and second nephew Chen Xiaopi spent all their fortunes and gathered thousands of people to form a Sanjiaoyong volunteer camp. On July 12th, the food supply team of the Imperial Guard Corps arrived at Long'anpu, Sanjiaoyong. They were ambushed by Sanjiaoyong volunteer camp.
This seemingly heroic special mission sergeant, Shigeyo Sakurai, actually died miserably.
The food supply team, except for 3 who escaped, were annihilated. The next day, the Japanese Army Fuzhou detachment came to the rescue, but was surrounded and ambushed by the volunteers. After 2 days and nights of bloody battle, the 894-person Fuzhou detachment almost ran out of food and ammunition, relying on forced soldiers to disguise themselves as beggars to seek help and survive. Since entering Taiwan, the Japanese army encountered the most serious setback and couldn't help but marvel. It can be said that from Hsinchu to Taipei,
All the mountains, rivers, grasses, and trees are bandits.
the Japanese army's southward march plan was severely frustrated and had to be suspended. From late July, Major General Yamane Shinsei led a brigade of Japanese troops to carry out indiscriminate raids between Taipei and Hsinchu, burning villages and massacring people in revenge. Kabayama Skinori promulgated the rules on military offenses by people of Taiwan. Anyone who resisted or disobeyed in any form would be killed, except that they surrendered. On July 25th, Qiu Fengjia, who was searched by the Japanese army, boarded a boat to sail back to the mainland with his parents. This took place 49 days after Tang Jinsong had left Taiwan. Qiu Fengjia wrote 6 farewell to Taiwan poems before leaving.
One of which reads, "All measures have been exhausted."
By this helpless subject of His Highness to get Taiwan back, what a frustrated and helpless feeling. The poem also expresses the aspiration to make a comeback one day. While the important figures of the democratic state of Taiwan sailed back to the mainland, a military figure, Liu Yongfu, still stayed in Tainan, waiting for opportunities to fight back. Liu Yongfu from Qinzhou, Guangxi province, once led his brigade known as the Black Flag Army to defeat the French army on the battlefield of Vietnam. After the outbreak of the First Sino-Japanese War, Liu Yongfu, the then chief commander of Nan'ao Town, was urgently sent to Taiwan by the Qing court to help with the defense. After the fall of Taipei and Tang Jinsong's return to the mainland, on June 28th, thousands of Tainan gentry members rallied in front of the Guangdi Temple, recommending Liu Yongfu to take the job as president of the Democratic State of Taiwan. And the presidential office was located in the Mazu Temple in Tainan, but Liu insisted on not taking the job.
He stayed at the Taiwan Military Command Office in the name of Deputy Army Chief of Nan'ao, Fujian, Guangdong,
assisting Taiwan defense affairs, assuming the highest military and political power to lead the anti-Japanese campaign. Liu issued an anti-Japanese notice to the military and civilians. His troops were still organized under the banner of the Black Flag Army, but it actually consisted of plenty of regular Qing troops who did not leave Taiwan. These were stamps, banknotes, and stocks issued under the name of the Democratic State of Taiwan. Taiwan was already in a dire situation in which everyone was so helpless. Liu Yongfu and the officials and gentry of Tainan had done everything possible to maintain the wartime economy and to protect Taiwan from falling into the hands of the Japanese.
In August, in Changhua, the Taiwan Resistance Army fought the biggest battle of the Yue War.
彰化在中台湾，彰化城，然后它东边有这个八卦山当屏障，所以是一个这个军事地理上非常重要的一个要塞，把大军全部集中到这个八卦山上。
Liu sent his trusted general Wu Pengnian to lead the army to the north side and organized the Changhua battle. Wu Tangxing and Xu Xiang led the remaining Xinmiao army to retreat southward from Miaoli, and thousands of Taiwan resistance fighters gathered in Changhua walled city.
要决一死战，最大的一场战役就是在八卦山。
400 Black Flag soldiers mounted artillery at the Bagua Mountain and shelled the Imperial Guard Corps on the other side of the Daduxi River.
日本军佯装要从正面来进攻，事实上他是摸黑，从八卦山的背后小径上来，从清军的背后来偷袭。说清军浑然不知，吴汤兴、吴鹏年等人都死在彰化八卦山的这一场战役。
This day was August 28, 1895. 70 years later, in 1965, while plowing the ground, a local farmer dug a bone pit. It contained 679 skeletons, and it was verified that they belonged to the heroic anti-Japanese fighters of the Battle of the Bagua Mountain. Kabayama Skinori originally thought Taiwan is just a palm-sized land and can be wiped out at one stroke. But now he felt that his strength was not enough. The base camp quickly sent more troops. The blended 4th Brigade and the 2nd Division were dispatched to Taiwan for reinforcements. The Japanese army established a southward headquarters to formulate a new combat plan. 40,000 troops would advance by sea and land, besieging Tainan from 3 directions. In Budai Port, Chiayi, on October 10th, the blended 4th Brigade was led by Prince Fushimi Sadanaru and landed here. Prince Sadanaru was the younger brother of Prince Kitashirakawa Yoshihisa. After landing, the 4th Brigade immediately advanced to Tainan.
From Yanshi Port to the railway bridge, resistance was everywhere.
Prince Sadanaru's troops then launched a powerful raid.
In just a few days, more than 600 or 700 enemy soldiers were shot or beheaded by the 5th Joint Forces.
If the number of people killed by the 17th Joint Forces is added, there should be over 1,000 killed. The second day, the blended 4th Brigade landed in Budai Port. On the morning of October 11th, the 2nd Division landed from Fangliao, Pingtuan. Jiedongjiao was the location of Zuodui. On the day of the landing of the Japanese army, the leader of Zuodui, Xiao Guangmei, led the volunteer resistance army to face the enemy and started the first battle of the southern anti-Japanese battle, the Battle of the Buyuelo. The ancient Buyuelo of the Xiao family was the gate to enter Jiedongjiao village. The battle that took place here left the Japanese army with an unforgettable, painful memory. The attack of Buyuelo made the 3rd Squadron entrapped into a fatal position. In the end, at a cost of 52 people killed and injured, and with the help of several echelons of reinforcements, the Japanese army was finally able to break through this gate tower.
日本人到最后占领了，还把这些乡民都抓起来。他怎么样呢？他就闻，你手上你有火药味，就马上就把你这个处决掉了。我的高祖父萧光明率领的很多的那个乡民，都遭到杀害，包括他自己2个儿子萧叶祥。 萧声响也战死在这个战役里面啊，等于是我的曾祖父都死在这个战场上。
45 days after the Battle of Wuyuelo, a larger battle erupted in the Liudui area, the Battle of Huoshaojuan. The original name of Huoshaojuan was Changxing Village. On November 26th, under the leadership of Qiu Fengyang,
the Liudui Volunteer Army met with the 2nd Division of Major General Motomi Yamaguchi's over 1,000 elite troops.
They fought for half a day with swords broken, arrows gone. They were slaughtered.
Based on Japanese statistics, in this battle, they killed over 300 people and burned down 4 villages.
Changxing Village became ashes by one torch, hence it got this name. The Japanese army encircled and approached Tainan City from 3 directions. Liu Yongfu was already unable to hold it. He pinned his last hope on Tainan's last defense line, the Zhengwen River. The decisive moment had come for the defenders. The defeat was inevitable, but Xu Xiang was ready to fight to the end. He was only a martial art tutor in rural Miaoli, yet he fought from Qinzhou to Tainan in the 1895 war and participated in almost all important battles. Several times he was almost killed, but he went back to fight again and again. He fought his last battle by the Zhengwen River. He was shot and fell to the ground, but he jumped up and yelled out, "I died for my country. I don't have any regret." When the news arrived, Liu Yongfu was of complete helplessness. It was said that the Japanese had printed 60,000 copies of his pictures to arrest him and tried every way to capture him. But Liu Yongfu still escaped from Taiwan. On October 20th, 1895, the 1895 anti-Japanese movement, in the name of the democratic state of Taiwan, ended. On the early morning of October 21st, Major General Yamaguchi of the 2nd Division
entered from the small south gate
into the undefended Tainan walled city. The Imperial Guard Corps did not grab the first entry honor. On October 22nd, Kita Shirakawa Yoshihisa entered the Tainan walled city from the main east gate. He was carried on a stretcher. On November 5th, the Japanese government announced that Prince Kita Shirakawa Yoshihisa died of malaria on October 28th. Prince Kita Shirakawa Yoshihisa was deified because of his special status and was designated as guardian of Taiwan by the Japanese government. Wherever he had been to, imperial member monuments were erected and plenty of shrines were built for him. The Taiwan Shrine, built in 1901, was very fancy, second only to the Yasukuni Shrine in Japan. Today's Taipei Grand Hotel was built on the ruins of this Taiwan Shrine. In the so-called 1895 Battle of Conquering Taiwan, the Japanese army mobilized 2.5 divisions with nearly 50,000 troops, over 1/3 of the country's total military strength at that time. In addition, there were 26,000 military laborers. The total strength was over 70,000, yet it took almost 5 months to occupy Taiwan. Lieutenant General Kita Shirakawa and Major General Yamane Shinoda were dead. Over 4,600 were killed or died of sickness. Over 27,000 were infected and injured. The number of casualties far exceeded that of the First Sino-Japanese War. On November 18, 1895, the Governor-General of Taiwan, Kabayama Skinori, reported to headquarters in Kyoto.
The whole island was healed.
In the last days of 1895 in Taiwan,
Provocative notices by a man called Hu Ajin, who claimed himself to be appointed by Liu Yongfu,
continued to appear in Taipei City. Hu Ajin, or Hu Jiayu, was one of the leaders of the Xinmiao army, pledging to rally the masses to annihilate the traitorous Japanese. In the early hours of New Year's Day, Hu Ajin and other volunteer groups launched attacks. Jian Daxi's group was one of the main forces in this siege.
华山之际，他以为已经征服了台湾了，没有想到，后来这个民间还有相当深厚的抗日力量了。那么当中 台北的简大师，然后中部的柯铁虎，南部的林少猫，那就是抗日三盟了。
Jin Zhonghao, who operated a martial arts school in Tamshui, was a descendant of migrants from Nanjing. He had studied fighting skills in his childhood. He was endowed with strong arm muscle and was capable of lifting hundreds of pounds of stone lions. So he was called a big lion. At the end of 1895, Jian Dashi led an armed uprising. His force once grew to 5,000. It was the most powerful anti-Japanese rebel force in northern Taiwan. He attacked Taipei City twice and fought against the Japanese for 3 years. In 1900, Jian Dashi was arrested in Zhangzhou and sent back to Taiwan. He was tortured and executed by the Japanese Governor General's office. After being arrested, Jian Dashi confessed his anti-Japanese motives.
The Japanese were ruthless.
They repeatedly went to my house to provoke troubles and raped my wife and daughter. My wife died, my sister died.
My mother and my sister-in-law died. There were more than 10 people in the family, and only a few children and nephews were left, and then they were killed.
Hence, Jian Dashi swore the Japanese was his absolutely irreconcilable enemy. The Tieguo Mountain in Yunlin County was an anti-Japanese base in central Taiwan. There were 2 anti-Japanese leaders here. One was Liu Yongfu's favorite officer, Jian Yi, and the other was the young Ke Tiehu.
柯铁虎，他年轻有为，枪法又准，人又机智，大家推举他领导这个抗日的义军，据守铁国山，用游击战让日本伤透了脑筋。
The Japanese army, in response to the challenge by Ke Tiehu's anti-Japanese armed forces, unexpectedly launched a retaliation on civilians. This was the Yunlin massacre.
一场惨绝人寰的大屠杀，见人就杀，看到村庄就烧，能够拿走的就抢。铁国山附近这里有55个村庄受了这样子灾难。 还有5000多户的民家被烧了，当地就变成惨绝人寰的地狱。这个是日军随军的人员所描写的。
According to relevant calculations, in the 7-day massacre of Yunlin, a total of 6,000 people were killed. Taiwan Provincial General Chronicle read that the total death must be over 30,000. The Yunlin massacre shocked the international community, and overseas media raised the most angry voices.
The Japanese are adopting a strategy of annihilating the entire people of Taiwan. Their harvest is destroyed. Their homes are burned down. Their ancestors' graves are excavated. Women are abused.
That is an outrage. 3 months after the Yunlin massacre, in the Hengchun area, another Hakka figure organized his own group. He was Lin Xiaomao. He was a well-off businessman engaged in rice milling and brewing business. Based on the police chronicle of the Taiwan Governor General Office, Lin Xiaomao does nothing to harm the good people, but aims at slaughtering Japanese military officials. The Japanese Governor General's office even said,
Lin Xiaomao
is the bravest and most intractable figure for the officials and police in southern Taiwan. In May 1902, Lin Xiaomao was lured into a trap by the Japanese army. He was shot in a paddy field in his hometown, and his head was cut off and displayed to the public. In 1915, 20 years after Japan ruled Taiwan, in a one-year temple called Xi Lian in Tainan,
an anti-Japanese regime named Daming Mercy Country was established.
Its leaders were Yu Qingfang, Luo Jun, Jiang Ding, and others. When Taiwan was ceded in 1895, they all joined the anti-Japanese volunteer army. Yu Qingfang made Xi Lian as his base and set up an altar to develop believers, proclaiming that Japan's kismet was coming to an end and encouraging his followers to rise up to overthrow the Japanese rule. The news broke out and Luo Jun was arrested. Yu Qingfang fled to Tapani to meet Jiang Ding. In July 1915, he led thousands of followers to start an uprising. With only primitive weapons, they launched a series of attacks on the Japanese. And in the Fuzhou mountain, they battled in blood with the Japanese army for 3 days and nights. The uprising was brutally suppressed. The Japanese army killed everyone in Tapani. Thousands of volunteer fighters and people were slaughtered. It was called Tapani Massacre. Yu Qingfang and other 1,957 people were arrested. The prison was overcrowded, and Japanese troops set up temporary cages in the temple. This is the scene where the defendants were taken to court for trial from Tainan prison. At that time, the cavalry barrack, the former home of the Lian family, had been occupied by the Japanese. The Tainan district court was built here. The trial took place there. 1,482 people were prosecuted, 453 of whom were sentenced to fixed-term imprisonment, and up to 866 were sentenced to death. As the news spread, the road was in uproar. Due to pressure from various quarters, the Governor General's office had to announce a commutation of the sentences, and the death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment. But 95 people, including Yu Qingfang, Luo Jun, and Jiang Ding, had already been executed. The 1915 Tapani incident was the largest of its kind, with the largest number of victims in Taiwan's armed resistance against Japan over the past 2 decades. Thereafter, the armed anti-Japanese operations by the Han people in Taiwan had been completely suppressed. In July 1933, a hunter deep in the mountains of Wushe, Nantou County, found a body with a bullet hole in the head and a rusty .38 type rifle next to him. He was Mona Rudao. The Japanese had been searching for his whereabouts for 3 years.
莫纳鲁道这个人哦，他15岁就已经猎过人头。就我听到我知道的时候，他是一个非常慷慨，然后很有豪气的一个人，是一个很会征战的人。
Wushe, located in the mountainous area of central Taiwan, is named for its being mostly surrounded by fog in the morning and dusk. Over 1,000 meters above sea level, over a dozen tribes of the Siddiq people live on hills.
日本统治台湾已经30几年，赛德克族莫纳鲁道这个部落已经被日本人列为魔幻部落。
日本对台湾原住民有几个手段，一个是围剿，好用武力去围剿你。
1910年代左右呢，佐久间卓马泰推动了所谓的5年讨伐计划，对于所谓的我们台湾东部的山区进行比较全面的一个，你可以把它当成是一个战争，对原住民的战争哈。 这个过程呢是很激烈哈。
These were commemorative photos of the Japanese Army's military operation against the Aborigines in Taoyuan, Qinqiu, Nantou, Yilan, and other places in 1913. In 1914, the Japanese Army launched an expedition against Taroko area. These were the commemorative photos.
到1915年左右，原住民也慢慢的等于是被日本军事镇压给那个。 压制住了哈，压制住了。
As the suppression by force was in action, an indoctrination of the Aborigines was in progress at the same time.
他用教化，比如说安排你到日本去参观，去看看日本的实力是怎么样，比如说他们的部队或者他们的设施等等，你看我们多强，所以你应该是服从我们。
讲简单一点，他就是向他们示威。有很多的头目确实就反抗日本的那种雄心壮志就消失了，真的害怕说哦。
Mona Rudao had been to Japan and had seen the power of the Japanese Empire, but he was not fearful.
之前的时候，他们很自由的去工作， 去山上打猎了，织布、种小米了，都可以有饭吃。日本政府来了要管制，他们没有办法种小米，也不能打猎，不能织布，这样又每天义务劳动，背木板、背木斗，也没有一点工钱给我们。
要服劳役、义务劳动，比如说盖学校、盖宿舍，日本的宿舍，盖什么呢？盖派出所。
1908年是开雾社的那个派出所开始，往里面的那个是道路桥梁，那个都是用原住民的那个人力的。
那你知道有很多交通是很不发达的啊，它特别那个海拔，它2-3千公尺能到这样的一个部落，这个对原住民来讲是相当辛苦的哈。
爸爸说他9岁也跟着他的爸爸去背木材，他说小孩子嘛，他也要背，流着眼泪。
我们女孩子大肚子，也要带她去背那个木材，大肚子生下孩子1个礼拜就要去，全家人要去哦。
我们的老百姓受苦，
他们在很痛苦，很痛苦。
Goto Shinpei, the third civil administrator, founded Taiwan's police rule during the Japanese occupation to strengthen local law and order. The power of police had penetrated into the civilian's life. It was so pervasive that the ordinary people were too scared to mention it.
原住民整个内山的部落呢，所有的公务员都是用警察任命的，也就是警察政治。
这些警察对原住民非常的不客气，动不动就打人。所以，日本警察在原住民部落是很凶暴的一种形象。
The fuse was finally ignited.
The Mahebo village was holding a wedding banquet, and Japanese police officer Katsumi Yoshimura passed by. Out of courtesy, Tadao Mona, the son of Mona Ruda, toasted him. Yoshimura hated the unclean fist, so he strongly rejected it, hitting Tadao Mona's hand with a baton. A brawl occurred. The next day, Tadao Mona was arrested and tortured.
Old and new hatreds added together. They couldn't bear it anymore.
Mona Rudao decided to fight back.
雾社事件，就是为了争这个自由。
他们追求是灵魂上的自由。一群男人、一群女人一起求死。
On October 27, 1930, the Wuxia Public School held a joint sports event. Taking this opportunity, Mona Rudao led the 6 tribes from Wuxia to launch an uprising. They rushed into the venue of the sports event. 139 Japanese were killed.
对日本人来讲，简直是晴天霹雳。一个他们认为魔幻的部落，还会发生这么大规模的一个针对日本人的起义。
2 days later, 2,500 regulars and police forces mobilized by the Governor General's office entered Wuxia. Mona Rudao led over 1,000 men and women in Wuxia, old and young, to fight bloody battles with the Japanese army in the dense mountain forest for over a month. The well-equipped Japanese army used aircraft, mountain cannons,
and even erosive gas bombs that were strictly prohibited by international conventions.
When men ran out of ammunition and food supplies, the citic women made their own resistance.
那些妇女，她们为了要让自己的孩子、自己的丈夫能够勇敢地去战斗，她们选择集体自尽。
老人、妇女全部都自己吊死。
一棵树像果子一样，满满的都是吊死的。
The conflicts between tribes were instigated, weapons distributed, large rewards offered, letting brothers fight their own brothers.
日本人还是用他一贯的手法，就是以夷制夷，所以就是利用这个部落跟这个部落的矛盾，让他们自相残杀。最惨烈的就是骨肉相残啊！
看，这个是有老人、小孩子都有， 这个日本人带我们自己的兄弟杀我们自己的兄弟，101个头。
101个人头排成一堆，后面就是警察。好，旁边的一些原住民就是被日本胁迫，好去杀回来的。好，这是在人类发展史里面是相当残忍的。
Mona Rudao also chose to end his own life. He went deep into the mountains and killed himself with a bullet on a tall cliff. "42 years later, in 1973, the skeleton of Mona Rudao was grandly buried back in Wuxi. Over 400 skeletons of the anti-Japanese Wuxi victims were also buried here. This group of heroic people who chose to die did not leave their names. But they all have a common title, Citic Bell.
赛德克是他们认为是巴莱是真正的。
这个巴莱就是真正的人。
The number of rebels and civilians killed by the Japanese in the 50 years since 1895 is difficult to count. Like Mona Rudao, they already turned into soils and mixed with rivers and mountains. Their sacred blood and heroic demeanor are blessing the common folks on this land.
Spring sorrow is hard to dispatch. I can only force myself to watch the mountain. The past is still distressing my heart that I really want to drop my tears. My 4 million fellows, let us cry together. On this day last year, Taiwan was ceded.
1 year after the signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, Qiu Fengjia, who lived in Jiaoling, Guangdong, wrote this poem, Spring Sorrow. After returning to the mainland, Qiu could not forget Taiwan. He named his study Niantai Jingshe and renamed his son Qiuzong to Niantai.
He died of illness in his ancestral land, and his last words were,
"I should be buried southward. I cannot forget Taiwan." Plenty of Taiwan gentry members crossed westward to inland. Tainan Jinshi Xu Nanying and Juren Wang Chunyuan returned to Jiangzhou. Lugang Jinshi Cai Daofang settled in Jinjiang. Taiwan's 2 largest families, Banqiao Lin Weiyuan and Wufeng Lin Qiaodong, returned to Xiamen with their families and rebuilt their homes on Gulangyu Island.
那么剩下这些老百姓，包括我的家人在里面，那就是待宰的羔羊一样的。所以，我们家整个的马兵营被日本人呢，以1块钱吧，就是象征性的把它征收了。我们期待期防的这个族人呢，那么就散居到台南呢附近各地。我们的根呢，被日本人就这样子就等于是除掉了。我的祖父他曾经讲过，说是身为炎黄的华胄啊，而为他族之贱奴，这个是气血追心呐。
Li Yatang determined to write a history of Taiwan by himself. He spent 10 years to complete this great historical work, The General History of Taiwan.
他有他自己的一个主要的一个看法，那就是民族的大义。